Hello and welcome to FinTech Talk. I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today we're looking at digital transformation in the mortgage sector. Now, mortgages is a huge business in the UK, Europe and beyond, but not primarily thought of as a cutting-edge industry, but maybe mortgage providers are missing a trick. So we want to find out what's possible, what is the cutting edge in mortgage technology, and how can you transform your organization to get there? Well, as ever, we've put together a truly expert panel to guide you through the possibilities. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our experts for today. I'm delighted to welcome Will Stevens. Will is UK Customer-Led Transformation Lead at PwC. Now, anyone who works in banking and fintech will be aware that PwC helps organizations transform. Everyone from banks through to fintechs. PwC is normally there somewhere in the equation. Will, wonderful to have you with us.
Thanks, Charles. Lovely to be with you.
Cool. From the sort of mortgage lending side, we have Jonathan Workman. Jonathan is Transformation Director of the Mortgages Division of Paragon Banking Group. Paragon is listed on the London Stock Exchange. It's a member of the FTSE 250. It provides mortgages. It provides loans and business services. So it's a full service banking organization. So Jonathan, great to have you with us today.
Thanks very much, Charles. Good to be with you.
And it's wonderful to welcome a regular on FinTech Talk, Tom Byrne. Tom is Head of Product and Innovation EMEA at Encino. Now, Encino is one of the world's cutting-edge providers of cloud-based solutions for banks and fintechs. Its services are used by more than 1,800 organizations worldwide, and that portfolio includes a cutting-edge mortgage solution. So, Tom, great to have you with us.
Great to be here again, Charles. Good to see you.
Now, perhaps we could just talk about, well, first of all, let's talk about the figures that have come out. Mortgage lending looks healthy. Bank of England figures have been published. So we have a news item that just sums up the data, but it looks as if mortgage lending is robust and competitive, which leads me to think, Will, that organizations are going to need pretty robust and rigorous backends to cope with demand, especially in a competitive environment. And Will, perhaps you could just sum up for us the condition of mortgage providers at the moment. I mean, we don't primarily think of mortgages as the cutting edge of technology because of the pace at which it works. It doesn't need to be. So maybe some of the providers have fallen behind. Well, but when you see a lot of organizations, is this a kind of division or niche that's still riddled with legacy tech?
Thanks, Charles. I mean, just a little bit on the market more generally. I think obviously we are starting to see a strengthening. We've been through a period of a lot of competition off the back of obviously the volatility post mini budget, etc. That I think created a lot of sort of operational challenges for a lot of the lenders. We're obviously going into a cycle, whether we see the aggressive sort of interest rate decreases that maybe we would have anticipated a couple of years ago becoming something that looks like a lot more of a sort of a stable, higher for longer type regime, but it is still a gradually decreasing sort of rate environment, which obviously is something that the lenders haven't experienced for a long time. So how they respond to what that high watermark from an interest margin perspective, I think it's going to be interesting, and whether that's a case of investing now whilst the sun is shining for that more challenging market environment, I think is going to be an interesting one. I think on the complexity of the tech estate that sits underneath this, yes, we do absolutely still see a lot of legacy technology, both in terms of origination and core platforms, in a lot of the lenders, particularly those large lenders who've built up through a combination of organic and inorganic growth, and quite often that's a very hard thing to unlock. That migration of a legacy mortgage book is probably the hardest thing you can do as a bank from a tech perspective, and a lot of people have shied away from doing that. So a lot of the big lenders sitting with 4 or 5 core mortgage systems, different origination workflows, patching together from a digital experience perspective on top of that. So yeah, a very complex state. And what that presents, I think, for some of the smaller lenders is an opportunity to differentiate if they can get a cleaner technology estate to deliver an improved customer experience for both the end customer and for the broker.
Right. Well, we hope there is room for improvement for these organisations. I mean, Jonathan, just talk us through what's been happening at Paragon, because you gave me a hint before the show that you've made considerable progress in transforming your operations, which is great. It's kind of why you're on the show, because you're absolutely perfect to talk to. Just tell us about what's going on at Paragon.
Yeah, and I think you gave Charles just an overview of banking services that Paragon operate, and the biggest division that within Paragon, and the longest that really where we started was as a buy-to-let lender. And so our focus for mortgages is buy-to-let, and particularly in the specialist buy-to-let market. So, we typically deal with landlords with large portfolios. The vast majority of the applicants that we have come through, those landlords are under a limited company structure, and a handful of, that can range from a handful of properties to hundreds of properties in a portfolio. So it's all broker introduced for us as well. So there's a complexity to our business, which, is where we've excelled over the last few years and built the business on. And I think just in terms of relation to systems, we've really kind of made the most of our legacy systems and came to a point a couple of years ago where we needed to move on to new technology. And I think just talking about from Will's comments, it is about those legacy systems have served us well, but increasingly it was becoming you had to work harder and harder to really kind of stand out in the market. And I think that's where regulation comes in, and the complexity of the business. It's tempting to continue to use those legacy systems because they've served us well, but I think we absolutely needed to take the step to introduce new technology into the estate. So we've worked for the last 2 years on developing our own system. We took the plunge to actually, it was kind of huge undertaking to build our own system, having looked across the market. And the reason for that is because we are specialists in the relationships that we have, in the products that we provide. Nothing really stood out to us to actually serve our customers as well as we wanted to. So I think our decision was basically to hold up the strategy, the requirements, talking to customers, and look at what was going to serve us best. So we've spent the last 2 years building a new front-end platform, which we've piloted for the last 9 weeks, and just putting it through its paces for us to roll out early in the new year.
Great. So you've been through it, so you know what it takes. Fantastic.
Very much so.
And Tom, just give us a clue as to the improvement that could be made to organisation by upgrading technology. Because I can bet some people watching this will be thinking, yeah, but it's mortgages. It's, we could probably do it with pen and paper if we really put our minds to it. But what a leap is there for organisations that get it right? I mean, are we talking, AI enhanced analytics? Are we talking just ease of use? Are we talking robustness? What are the benefits on improving IT when it comes to mortgages?
Yeah, mortgages can be sexy, Charles. I promise you, the more that we get into it, it's possible. Look, I think there's the obvious benefit, but I think a lot of organizations have gone through sort of the low-hanging fruit of sort of the time to app, time to offer, time to cash type metrics that we've got. And especially here in the UK, there's a lot of bottlenecks that exist sort of once you've got past that offer part of the process, and sort of the archaic ecosystem that starts to come into play in terms of, the conveyancing processes that we've still got, the valuation processes that we've still got in large parts of the country. I think it's more aligned than what we're seeing now to what Jonathan was talking about there, and probably some of the reasons that they went on the transformation that they have. I think now that the low-hanging fruit for your more bog standard residential, lots of people that have, income that can be verified quite easily, like lots of the lenders have sort of gobbled that up and got the speed and ease of use that is important to consumers for that. But what we see particularly is, lots of people have sort of the easy journey, so to speak, automated, digital, all of the bells and whistles. But as soon as you start to introduce complexity, the system says no, and you sort of end up handing off to a human, throwing humans at it, and the process and the customer experience sort of takes the hit there. So I think the opportunity for technology providers, the opportunity for lenders is starting to understand, it sounds like what Jonathan's done of what is our sweet spot, what are we doing with customers, what's our complexity, and how do we design an experience that is as digital as possible for that complexity. Whether that's in retention journeys, whether that's just in the types of structures that you've got to service. I think that's the next frontier. And you've got AI and you've got all of the WYSI tools that are coming online that can start to service this. But I think we've sort of done the easy yards, and it's now time for the industry to start getting into all of the other types of mortgage lending that is such a huge part of the volume that we've got here in the UK and throughout Europe.
Wow, that's really comprehensive. I mean, Will, when Tom puts it like that, it sounds like this is an opportunity not just to introduce some sort of whizzy tech stuff, but to actually rethink the way organizations work. I mean, when you deal with organizations going through a digital transformation, how much is it in actual fact a kind of business transformation, that it's such a wholesale change? They can change not just, some of the back end and front end interfaces and technologies, but can actually really remodel the way the whole organization works.
Yeah, that's a big question. So let's just sort of unpack that a little bit. I mean, you do have to go back to the customer. I mean, the sort of the clues in my title, that is it is a customer-led approach that you need to take. I think we're talking a lot about mortgages, but actually what that underpins is a home buying process. And when you think about that home buying sort of experience that customers are going through, it's still really fragmented, whether that's as an individual or as a landlord, where I source that property from, as I go through that estate agency process, I'm into the lender, and then into a as you've described, I think, Tom, a conveyancing process, got completion, etc. And then that's even before I start to actually worry about moving into the property or taking control of the property. There's very few organizations that can play a critical orchestrating role across that end-to-end experience. So that's one lens, of the extent to which your platform can support your ability to bring that much closer together into an integrated experience, I think is an interesting one. And then the other side of that is what sits underneath the glass from an operational perspective. Quite often you'll find in lenders that you've got two businesses. You've got a specialist business that might be buy-to-let or more niche mortgage, and then you've got your sort of flow prime residential business, and you'll find different technology stack sitting underneath that, quite often sort of front to back. And that's largely driven because there's differences in terms of the speed and volume, and actually how you create value as an organization in terms of flow versus differentiated service. I think we see as an opportunity, really, an ability to bring those two worlds together onto a more common set of technology. So you can start to see some real operational benefit of sharing capacity from an organizational perspective across those two different domains, better view of customers, and a greater use of sort of common data underneath those. So that means you can deliver high volume, high operational effectiveness, but also put technology alongside the human and deliver a much more sort of hybrid or augmented capability, particularly around the underwriter. Sort of this forgotten individual that actually is the critical resource in a mortgage business. What technology can you give to the underwriter to really transform their operational performance, and then unlock that and put that back into the hands of the customer? I think is a really interesting topic at the moment.
Well, that's a really comprehensive vision. And Jonathan, how did it work at Paragon? I mean, was it just a case of introducing new tech, or was it a case of really looking as broadly at everything as Tom has described, as Will has described, about remodeling the way the company actually operates?
No, it is very tempting, of course, to take what you're doing now and just look at putting it onto a new platform. But we looked at it very much the way Will and Tom have been talking, which is just thinking through very carefully about certainly the feedback that you got, a huge amount of information and feedback that we'd had over the preceding years, almost checking in with brokers and customers as to what was important, thinking about what the business was built on and the strategy around that, and then kind of really planning the design around that. So just to give you an example, I mean, from Paragon's perspective, we've got a really good reputation for products and for also relationships and being able to speak to the underwriters. It's interesting Will was saying that, because fundamental to our design is, I mean, I said it 1,000 times, but it's very cheesy, but it's not just the technology platform here. It's very much technology, data, but with people all the way through it. And the balance that we had to strike was to make sure that We took out all of the friction points. We took out all of this sort of unnecessary admin, the things that didn't have value. And again, it's very textbook, but it's surprising when you get into the detail of the design, where those things, where you need to kind of retain the underwriter or the individual into that, and the member of staff into that. So an example with Paragon is that we're equipping the underwriters, but every single case still has an underwriter involved, because of the complexity of what we do and the fact that we need them to interact with the customer, with a broker, and sometimes with the landlord. We need to make sure the underwriter is involved right the way through. So the system, technology, and the data sets it up for the underwriter, but fundamentally they've got to understand the case. They've got to make a call on it, because with our business proposition, no case is the same. You've got very different demands, very different strategies for the landlords as well. Another example is that AVMs, automated valuation models, where you get an instant valuation on a property, isn't necessarily the best thing for a buy-to-let, because of rental returns, etc. So we've built the business on the basis of inspecting every single property. Now, that's not for everyone, but we've chosen to we've got our in-house surveyor team, and they still value every single property. So we've introduced AVMs and property data up front to give more certainty around whether we'll do that property or not, and what requirements we might have, but we still value the property. So those are the fundamentals that we've retained, and we're not sort of throwing everything out and then just starting afresh. You kind of got to say what's important for the business and build the proposition around it, so you're equipping those people to do their job as best they can.
So, okay, so you're not letting the technology, getting carried away and saying we're just going to, automate and forget and streamline and maybe get away with some of the things that make us unique. You can actually ensure you've got the options, but you've still got the rigor that existed.
Yeah, no, we know that feedback from brokers and landlords is that they like interacting. They like the fact they can speak to an underwriter, and so it's making sure that that's set up as effectively as we can. But the whole data piece, just thinking about property data, we still use that. We've introduced sort of APIs right the way through. So there's more than 12 APIs that we've built the system around. And that's one of the challenging things, is to say what data are you going to use and how are you going to actually use it and apply it and present it to the underwriter, so that it's easy for them to progress the case and get a good understanding of the case.
That's great. And Tom, I'm just sensing people watching this might be thinking, yeah, we're going to upgrade, but we're a strange company. We've got our own particular way of doing things, that we therefore have to do everything in-house. We've already got our systems. I mean, if you take like Encino, that has a platform that, in theory, the benefit of cloud stuff, it's already built, rapid adoption, you just, not necessarily off the peg, but you're closer to it than if you started from scratch. If people do take the route of going with an organization like Encino, how bespoke can they make it? Are they buying off the peg? Can you adapt to what each weird and strange customer requires from you, and how well can you integrate with other parts of a bank or fintech?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think I would say this, right, but I think we like to talk a lot about sort of, and it's borne out in a lot of our examples of having, a lot of the legacy tech that we see, it's a very fixed product, so to speak. And I think historically, especially in the mortgage market that we've seen over here, a lot of it has been, this is the process, this is the workflow, this is the way that it functions, this is the data, and this is what's in the box. And if you want to change that, it's going to be costly, it's going to be customization, and you quite quickly end up on an upgrade path that it's not going to be too desirable. So I think a lot of lenders have looked at that, and for all of the reasons that Jonathan was outlining there, and said that's just not going to work in the way that we want to compete and the type of business that we want to have. So, you're seeing not just Encino, but all of the modern tech stacks now is coming with a prescriptive point of view, but then saying to the institution, hey, this is what we've seen as best practice. Now let's talk about what you need to make this work for your business. And I think the key is in some of the stuff that Jonathan was saying. I think fundamentally, if you're going to start transformations from scratch, there's a lot of work that is probably fundamentals that have to be done that is not going to be differentiating for you as an organization, which is kind of the evil that you have to go to if you try and build it in terms of just standard parts of the process, regulatory driven things that you will have to sort of challenge. But I think it's, and I would encourage all lenders to look at this as you're embarking on your transformation, is getting real clear around what is the parts of the process and where do we really add value and where do we differentiate, and have we got a partner that has a tech stack that allows us to embed our secret sauce? Because I think that's really the answer, and what you've got to get crisp on when you're starting to evaluate your tech estate, to make sure that you're going to be competitive and the technology isn't driving the business strategy. The business strategy is driving the use of technology in exactly the way that Jonathan was describing.
We have a question from the audience, which I think is just pertinent. How can data and AI be utilized across the mortgage journey? Will, just talk to us about AI in mortgage lending, because I can imagine a lot of organizations just haven't got involved yet. Total ignorance. What can be done?
I mean, Jonathan touched just on the data piece. Jonathan sort of touched on it. I think huge shift, I think, in terms of the extent to which data is now is API source rather than inputted or sort of collated sort of manually. So huge step change in terms of both the rate at which I can ingest data into my platform and the quality of that data. And actually, that's one of the first use cases I think we're starting to see people really sort of use AI at scale for. So it's the sourcing of that data. That could be machine reading documentation, doing fraud analysis on that documentation, and ensuring that you're not having to have humans sort of in the loop in terms of that piece. That's sort of one use case. The second use case I think is a really powerful one, and it goes again to what Jonathan was talking about, keeping the human in the loop, but really augmenting that. So sitting alongside the underwriter, and there's use cases as simple as actually helping that underwriter understand specific policy. So being able to ask in natural language, help me find what would happen if I changed these parameters of this particular underwriting, what policy would I need to sort of access, surfacing that policy information, or actually helping and support the underwriter in terms of the impact on a particular loan. So that sort of augmented, sort of almost para-planner type support to an underwriter is a proven use case, and starting to see some of that. And then the final piece, actually, if you think about that customer lifecycle, is actually some really interesting applications in the retention space. So I've collated all of this data as I've gone through the origination of the loan. I've had this customer for 2 or 3 years. What am I doing on my book to be really proactive in terms of my engagement into my customer base to drive highest possible retention? Am I using the data that I captured through the origination, or is it just the legacy static data that I'm using? So sort of 3 use cases there: sourcing the data, applying it from an underwriting perspective, and then actually this retention space is probably where we're seeing some really interesting adoption early stage.
Okay, well, those are really practical ideas. Jonathan, I can see you nodding away there. What's going on at Paragon? I mean, is it purely, straightforward use of data, customer retention, stuff like that? Or is there, are you also doing some fancy stuff with AI as well? What's paying off for you?
And I think Will's sort of outlined the areas that we're considering. I think we're certainly thinking about how we look at that, particularly with customer interaction. To begin with, I think where we've taken it is, to access data wherever we possibly can, instead of asking for the customer for it. But inevitably, there are still areas where we still need to ask for information documentation. So our initial step with AI and machine learning is to, where we do need to still ask for some documentation, is extracting the data from the document, meaning that it can be treated as structured data, categorize, analyze, present that back to the underwriter as if we'd access the data at source. So that's the first step that we've done in our initial build with the platform, and we're looking at refining that. And I think it's definitely a journey to see how you can maximize the effectiveness of doing that. So it's taking those steps that the underwriter or even administrator would do with the documentation, and taking it to the point where you can present it to an underwriter for their decision as part of the case. So we're trying to take all of the sort of back work out of that documentation that we still do need to access. So that's the case in point for us. But certainly we've also considered about where we aren't going to prioritize at the moment. So for instance, chatbot seems a kind of typical case for AI, is to work with sort of intelligent responses. But for our business, that's not something which we're going to prioritize, mainly because of feedback from brokers in that they don't enjoy that experience. It may be that it's a lot better these days and you can use AI to generate that. But actually, for our business, that's not a priority at the moment. We still want to kind of retain that human contact.
And Tom, I'd love to hear your take on this, because as I say, a lot of people watching this will be coming from backgrounds where they barely got started with AI. I mean, maybe they've got some good, data cases, but AI is beyond them. What can be done?
I think the guys have hit some of the most sensible starting points, and where we, have some of our own technology. We're seeing lenders in the space and sort of vendors around this start to hit into that. I think one of the areas more recently that we've seen, and it's probably a little bit further out, but I think it's coming fairly soon, is around sort of the future of sort of user experiences and using AI to generate user experiences based off of the persona that you are. So a lot of the technology that we see right now and the way that the technology is built is it takes you through a logical process and asks you maybe different questions depending on if you're a first-time buyer or a professional landlord. But some of the AIs and the models that you've got now actually can have the context of who you are and then generate quite a wildly different experience for, say, products or whatever it might be, based off of who you are and sort of what the context is that you're trying to come into, which gets us away from all of the change management that people on this call will be used to around traditional user interfaces, around the way that we roll out software, completely flips the way that that's built into something that is much more akin to sort of choose your own adventure to a certain degree. Yes, you need to have a lot of the plumbing of what the policy is, what I'm comfortable with. It needs to be in keeping with the way that the regulatory framework has advice and everything that it might be. But I think sort of the potential in the sort of medium term to have sort of these user experiences be much more based off of who you are, the sophistication that you've got, sort of the needs that you have for the type of journey that you've got is really exciting, and getting us away from sort of that one size fits all mentality that we've had maybe for too long in the industry.
Okay. Now, one question that gets raised in digital transformation projects is the human element. You can't just rely on your IT team to impose things from above. So, I mean, Jonathan, do you want to talk about this? How does this work? I mean, when people are delivering a project, I mean, the human element, you can't just tell people you're going to have a new IT system be delivered in, 6 months, can you? How does it actually work productively, taking people with you? I mean, is it about constant consultation? What can you advise people?
Yeah, no, I think it's that it's going to be a challenge, and I think building technology and designing it, building it is one thing, but actually bringing people along is just huge. And it's although it's going to be a big piece, and you've got to work very hard to make sure that you bring people along. It's even bigger than that once you're confronted with a new system. If you imagine here, we've had the same system for over 20 years, the core system. And over time, people have got very used to that. So new system will bring all sorts of improvements, but it's different to the way that people work. And it's inevitably going to be quite different in many areas. And you need a mindset change as well as changing the process. And so I think all of the things you mentioned, but involvement from beforehand. So you're clear on the design, you've got input from staff, customers, and brokers into the design so that you're hitting the right things. You set up the system, the design. I think as much as you can, we've had panels throughout the system build where we're playing back some of the builds, modules, maybe aspects of the functionality. So either in wireframes, or you can get people to use it in a sort of very crude way, but as much you can involve people throughout that time. And I think actually then to kind of be clear about the things that the system is going to be different about and why that is the case. So you might not understand why we need to bring the data in this way or structure it, and it's not quite as easy as taking it in any format, because it'll pay off in the end. So I think it's explaining some of those design points as well, why things have changed. Because I think with legacy systems, they are a lot more flexible, perhaps putting it that way, that enables you to manipulate a case or move a case through, and you'll find a way of doing it. With the new sort of design and technology, we're looking for it to be more structured in many areas because of some of the outputs that we're looking for. Retain some flexibility, but to do it in a way which means that the data is pure and that you can rely on it. So I think it's just an ongoing process. I think the pilot has proved to be a really important thing as well. So bringing people on board internally and brokers who understand it's a pilot, it's almost live testing, and you're setting it up on the basis we're going to react very quickly to any feedback that we get, any incidents that we get, but also any feedback about the design. And people can see that, yes, they'll come up against things which are different. We'll understand what's important to change and those things which we're going to drop in. And I think just in the 9-10 weeks that we've been live on the pilot, we've had 3 reasonably sized releases, bringing things in, changes, things that we didn't anticipate, behaviors that you've got to respond to. So I think all of those things will give the users, external or internal, a sense of what you're trying to do, and actually to respond to the things which matter most, and they can see progress on it. But it's a tough job.
That's a really comprehensive program. Wow. And Will, I mean, this is your specialist area. We're all familiar with organizations that get digital transformation a bit wrong, and they end up presenting employees with something that isn't quite right for them. What's the PwC formula? I mean, do you have a formula, or is every organization different? How do you make sure that people are at the center of this transformation?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, Jonathan, you covered a lot of this, which is you've got to put the customer, the broker, your employees at the heart of that transformation program. That's where it all starts. That's got to tie back to your organization's USP as well. So really deeply understanding how you as an organization uniquely create value in the market, and really ensuring that those are reflected in the proposition and then the capabilities in the system is critical. But I think, just to reinforce, the real secret sauce is that responsiveness. I think what we've seen now, the power of the technology is, these used to be, let's do a load of work up front, let's get really detailed in the requirements, let's really lock those down, let's go build those, test it really robustly, and then launch with a big fanfare, loads of communications, adoption, etc. We still want the fanfare, but ultimately this is about how do we get this as rapidly as we can into the hands of our customers, whether those are end customers or brokers, and involve them in the refinement process. Now, you need something as a platform that you can therefore change in a really rapid cycle. And if you can demonstrate to your users that you can take their feedback on board and respond to it, that is the biggest builder of advocacy, loyalty, and adoption. It's far beyond actually getting the requirement right the first time. People are quite accommodating to things not working perfectly. But if you can demonstrate, that's fantastic, thank you very much, I'm going to go fix that, and you do fix it, that's actually a big bump up in experience. So responsiveness, small change delivered rapidly, is for us the secret sauce of building great experiences and really high levels of adoption.
Sounds like a great formula. Tom, I can see you kind of nodding away there, and Will put such a convincing case. I can't imagine you disagreeing too much. What's your feeling? Have you any kind of tips to add on what it's like as the supplier of solutions, on how companies execute really well, bring their employees with them?
No, I think Will hit the nail on the head there. Will and Jonathan. I think it's about how you get something quickly out there and then continue to iterate from there. I'd say one of the things that we've witnessed, and maybe it's a little bit aligned to what Will was saying, is a lot of the time there's a project, there's a defined scope for phase one. People get into it, get into the project, it goes live, and then sort of they think that everything's over. And the market just changes too quickly. Customer expectation changes too quickly. The type of technology that you can take advantage of too quickly is there. So I think it's, how do you not create those monumental big events that Will was talking about, but how do you embed a culture of consistent change? Because that's the only constant that we're seeing for all of these projects, with everything that's going on, and making sure that you have the ability as an organization to keep responding to customer feedback, keep responding to broker feedback, and doing that consistently, not just on the first 2-3 months of your project, but as sort of a cultural bedrock of your organization.
Okay, we're entering the kind of final phase of the conversation. We've actually got a few good questions from the floor about how do you get started on a transformation? Also, how do we balance hyper-personalization with maintaining customer privacy and security? So there's a lot there. Perhaps we can just start, Will, with let's just start with sketching things out. So people have heard what's possible, and they're thinking, okay, what do we do next? Will, in your experience, when people are going to launch a transformation project, what is the first thing they should do? Is it going out and talking to vendors? Is it going out and talking to other organizations that have been through it? Is it, I don't know, giving PwC a ring? What do you recommend as the first step?
I mean, definitely giving us a call is an important first step. Again, we sort of touched on it. You've got to understand the role that you play in the market and actually how you create value. So it's got to tie back to your value proposition, which is ultimately rooted in the customer outcomes you're trying to deliver. So if you don't understand that and you're unable to articulate that through to the specific capabilities that you want to invest in, you're going to miss a trick. So I think if you can be very clear about that and then articulate that in terms of what is the target journey that we want to deliver for the broker or the customer, how is that enabled in a set of capabilities, what does that mean from a technology perspective, and iterate that really quickly so that you can actually get a North Star, a blueprint established. That's really how you get started. It's not a sequential process of writing requirements, running an RFP, selecting a vendor. That thing needs to be educated by what's available in the market. So take your proposition, engage with the market in terms of what's available and iterate, but do it super fast. Because by the time you're finished a long process of selecting and going to, the market will have moved. So that, again, it's a sort of bias to action and a bias to speed, but setting those sort of guiding principles, that North Star early, I think is the first step.
I think that's a theme for the episode, super fast iteration. And Jonathan, I'm going to ask you an awkward question, which is, what can go wrong during a transformation like this? I mean, you've got 2 years of hard-won experience. Forewarned is forearmed. What can you tell people who are embarking on a major transformation program about maybe little things that might go wrong along the way that you can warn them about?
I'd say probably resources. You don't go too far past resources. So expertise, having a clear idea of who you'll need in the project takes a lot of thinking through, and you won't get it right. But you've got to get it sort of 80% there. You've got to make sure that you've got a prioritization from the organization as well. So actually, I think talking through some of the things Will's just mentioned, it's being really clear up front and getting executive sponsorship, saying this is the priority of the project, being clear on what you're going to deliver, so the benefits that you're going to outline. So you've got that executive sponsorship and priority, which means that resources and expertise are going to be more readily available. But inevitably, there are going to be times when other things happen across the organization, that something regulation or another priority in another area of the bank, which is going to mean that you have to kind of juggle some of those resources. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge. It's not surprising. And I think it's inevitable that you're going to hit those times when people are going to be needed elsewhere and you can't tap into that. So it's being very nimble on your feet. And I think we took a decision quite early on to say, rather than, although this was an agile methodology, we built on an agile basis, DevOps, etc. We rather than sort of delivering it in smaller chunks, we found it was really important to deliver an end-to-end journey from application to offer, to make the impact externally, but also internally. It's phase one, so it's not the finished article, but it was more important for us to deliver that. And again, that was another challenge, which is you're actually building agile, I don't know, more than 900 user stories. You're building it in sort of feature level, but you've then got to bring it all through together. And I think the testing of that throughout that time, it's a massive kind of commitment in terms of testing, but then you bring it back round at the end and you've got quite a significant amount of time, which is end-to-end testing, once you've brought the whole thing together. So I'd say resources, testing, and your plan. So you stick to a plan, which is, how you're going to get to where that destination.
Okay. And Tom, my awkward question for you is, how do organizations know when they've got a good system? Like, what are the hallmarks? I'm thinking I've heard about, the need to iterate rapidly and the ability for flexibility in a platform. But how do you know when you've got a good one?
I think there's some leading indicators that we can go through as well. But I mean, ultimately, most of the time, most organizations are doing this is to remove costs, to grow the book, to retain customers. Like, there will be these KPIs. The systems really should just be a contributor to sort of a healthy business and everything that's going on there. I'd say that the things that we've seen and sort of what we try to impress upon when we speak with our lenders is we know that those are the KPIs and the big outcomes that we're all sort of shooting for. But there are always these leading indicators, whether it's broker advocacy and like listening to that network who's going to be the lifeblood for a lot of UK lenders, whether it's your internal colleagues, whether it's the customers, and how do you engage with them around their specific experience and what they're getting and what they're not getting, and just, not just relying on an NPS survey that you send out once every 2 years, but actually getting under the skin with that, so with some more focused people, because as the guys have said, a lot of this journey is still about the people, depending on what the context is. And if you fundamentally have the technology that delivers experiences that people want to engage with, want to resonate, that resonates with them, I think the KPIs in the long term are going to take care of themselves, and you're probably going to get a much bigger payout on your investments than if you just purely focused on the technology.
Right. And Will, the final question of the episode just goes to you, which is just to sum up the mindset needed for this kind of transformation. And I think just to recap on what you were saying, it sounds like what you're advocating is that this is not a transformation. It's about turning into an organization that is able to just develop continuously and smoothly on an ongoing basis, and to keep adapting and improving forever. Is that about right?
Yes, it is. But I just wanted to maybe just draw out one thread from what Jonathan was saying, which is that executive sponsorship. So creating real clarity around the reason for the transformation, for the change, ensuring that your exec are bought into that, but then actually that they do continue to drive that over the long term, because obviously programs change, priorities change. But if your exec really buy into that end-to-end vision and then lead that consistently, you can't go that far wrong, because you can then respond and change, and you need to be agile. But ultimately, if your exec are very clear where they want to be and continuously lead that, again, that's critically important. So yes, that executive sponsorship and a North Star, super important.
Okay, fantastic. Well, guys, we've covered a lot of ground. I must confess, I entered this episode thinking maybe a dry subject, but as Tom said, mortgages can indeed be sexy. There's so much that can be done here, whether it's with AI, whether it's using data to analyze customer retention. Every activity of mortgage lending can seemingly be improved with the right IT and right approach. So, guys, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's hugely appreciated on my behalf, and hopefully of those of our viewers too. So from Jonathan, from Tom, from Will, and myself, and everyone here at FinTech Talk, thank you so much for joining us.